Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Nural and I'm here with another analog photography video today, and I will be talking about long exposures. So if you're ready, let's begin. As I mentioned, today I will be talking about long exposures and what the technique actually means and what you need to be careful about when you're shooting in long exposures or the bulb mode in your camera. And in the upcoming videos, I will talk about different fun techniques that you can use your bulb mode with, such as light painting. So if you don't want to miss any of my upcoming videos, just make sure that you subscribe to my channel and hit the bell button. And I will be uploading a new video every Tuesday, so I'll see you here in the upcoming weeks. Otherwise, like I said, we are going to be talking about long exposures today and the general technique of it. I have talked before about shutter speeds in one of my previous analog photography videos, and shutter speed is basically the amount of time that the curtain in your camera stays open and lets light in, and it is defined by a fraction of a second normally. So what happens is, if I can just open this up, this is my Leica, and it is one of the cameras that I own that has the most different shutter speed range. And so here you have a thousandth of a second all the way to 1 second and then B. So shutter speed is actually here. And what happens is, like, if I was to shoot, let's say 500 of a second, when I press the shutter, the curtain inside opens and closes real fast. So it's like 1/500 of a second. Whereas if I was to shoot 1/60th of a second, it would open a little longer. Or if I was to shoot 1 second, again, it would open longer. So it would actually open for a total of 1 second. And even if I kept my finger here, the shutter curtain would close automatically. And when we move things to bulb mode, which is actually anything over 1 second, what happens is, as long as I keep my finger here in the shutter button, the curtain inside my camera stays open and I keep on exposing my film to more and more light. So I'm assuming this has been about 5 seconds since I started talking. So that means I have a shutter speed of 5 seconds. And the way that I use this is, if I shoot at night with a low ISO film, I need more light to enter my camera to get a proper exposure. Then I would use long exposure. Or if I was shooting with a pinhole camera that has a very small aperture, then I would again use long exposure. Or if I was doing light paintings and writing stuff with like sparklers and stuff, then again I would use long exposure. So long exposure is something you would use to let more light into your camera. But in general, it is actually a combination of your aperture, your film, the light conditions around you that ends up producing the perfect image or perfectly lighted image. So it is important to know how long you need to expose your film, and then also what other settings you need to consider. And like I said, the overall combination of these will allow you to create an image that has the correct lighting. So I just showed you some examples that I shot with my Diana F Plus in pinhole mode. And as I mentioned, pinhole is one of the techniques that you need long exposure for. And the reason behind that is a pinhole is usually over 150 apertures, f-stop, which means like literally a pinhole inside the camera. Because when I open this up, you actually see different, let's see if I turn this. So this is 22, this is 5.6, and pinhole is actually a lot smaller than that. So you really need to expose the film for a long period of time. And in outdoor shooting with a pinhole, depending on how bright it is outside, 2 or 3 seconds of an exposure time would be enough. But if you were indoors, then it would take somewhere between 5 to 7 minutes to even longer. And I actually shot some pinholes for like 15 minutes, which I've been very happy with. So it all depends on the combination of other factors. But at the end of the day, what you need is anything over 1 second, which ends up being a long exposure. And in order to make the long exposure not shaky or blurry, what you need to do is set your camera onto a spot that is stable. And one thing that I do a lot, if I'm shooting at night outside, I just put my camera on the ground and shoot like that. And it is actually called a red's eye view. So it is not something I created, but a general technique that is used by photographers. And it creates an image that sort of looks up from the ground. So let me just show you some examples of that. And if you don't want to do the red's eye view from the ground up, what else you can do is set your camera onto something else that is stable. Because like when you're doing a long exposure, even though you think your hand is quite steady, it ends up shaking a little bit when you press the shutter. And in order for the film not to be blurry or shaky, you need to keep things steady. So what you can do is put your camera on top of something else, like a wall or a bench next to the road if you're shooting at night, or you can set it on a tripod, of course, which is the smartest way to do it. But if you don't have a tripod, or if you don't want to carry it with you, or if you've forgotten it at home, then something else is to look for a place that is stable and that you can set your camera on top of, and then press your shutter like so, in order for your camera not to shake. And one other thing that you can do is, of course, hold your breath and try to be as still as you can, which I've done at times. But all of these will affect the results you get. Other than keeping your camera stable and exposing for a long period of time, one other thing you need to consider is the length of time that you're gonna need. And the little light meter that we did a few weeks back actually comes in handy in this experiment, because let's assume that I have 100 discs of film and I'm indoors and I'm shooting with f8, which is a medium aperture, I would say, and the exposure time would be 2 seconds in these settings. Or if I was to shoot with f22, the exposure time would go up to 15 seconds. And in both cases, it is longer than a fast aperture, so I need to keep my camera steady. Or if I was shooting outside under the sun, but doing a pinhole in like 250, then my exposure time would be 3 seconds. So if it is hard for you to guess the amount of time you need in order to get the perfect exposure or the perfect lighting, you can always use one of these, or you can download apps that do this. But as I said, the combination of the film speed, the lighting conditions, your aperture, and the exposure time all help get you closer to the perfect image that you want. So I suggest getting one of these or making one like we did a few weeks back. And before you press the shutter, just quickly check what the settings are until you get used to them. Because even now, after all these years of shooting analog photography and using different cameras and different films, I still have my doubts sometimes, and this always helps me make the correct decision. So this has been a shorter video, but I hope I was able to shed some light onto what long exposure is and what you need to be careful with when you're shooting long exposures. So if you have any additional questions or things I haven't mentioned that you're curious about, just drop me a line in the comments and I'll get back to you. And otherwise, I hope to see you here next week with another video. Bye!